Muted. All righty. Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Karl Sakas here, agency consultant. Excited that you're here for the public office hours. This is only the second of the Zoom-based public office hours. I've done office hours as a way to give free advice to people in person for over 6 years. Did that every week at a chocolate factory near me in Raleigh, North Carolina in the US. Of course, with the pandemic, the chocolate factory is not accepting guests. So, I've been meaning to take this online for a while, and with the pandemic, it's happened now. So, and let's see, I saw you said, RK and Heather, you mentioned the screen is black. Let me turn the video on and off. Okay. If people could confirm in chat, are you able to see me now? No. Weird. It sounds like some people. It's fuzzy and it keeps freezing. That's weird. I'm not sure what's happening. I guess, are people able to hear me? At least hear me okay? Okay. It sounds like there may be some intermittent video issues. Fingers crossed that those will get better as we go. But glad you can hear me. Thank you. All right. Well, so this is, so I'm frozen in a different position from before. Well, hopefully whenever I freeze, I'm not in some sort of an embarrassing pose, but I don't know, we'll find out. And so far I can see everyone else generally on videos, or not everyone, but most people. All right, we're gonna continue. So thanks for joining, and thanks for voting in the poll. Let's share the results of the poll. This is about how has the pandemic impacted your agency. We have votes from 6 people. Here's what we got. It's quite a mix. One person says business is up a lot. Another says business is up somewhat. Another person about the same as before. And then 3 people have noted business is down. 1 down somewhat, 2 down a lot. That matches some of what I'm hearing. Not everyone is seeing things down. Some are doing better than before, but that's certainly not the majority. On the positive side, as I speak with CMOs, they're starting to think about and prepare for the recovery. I think they may be a little overly optimistic about that, but certainly they're thinking about it. And so when agencies are there to help them, that'll be important timing as things do turn around. All right, so thank you for voting in the poll. All right, so we have a couple hot seat spots. These are for people who volunteered to share their particular challenge, and we'll talk through it on video here, so everyone can hear. And we also have, probably will have some time to answer other questions as well. So in terms of order, Omi, you will be up first. RK, you will be up next. I think right now the other person is not here, so it'll be Omi, and then RK. So when the time comes, we'll go ahead and take you off mute, or you take yourself off mute, talk through the question, we'll talk through it for a bit, and then go from there. And if anyone has not introduced yourself on chat yet, feel free to do so. It'd be great to meet you. Name, your firm, and where you are. All right. So Omi, if you're ready, you can go ahead and take yourself off mute. All right, Omi, hello. Good.
Hi, thanks.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Well, in the pre-questions, you mentioned that you wanted to volunteer for the hot seat, and your particular question was, what are some top ways to motivate employees in the midst of reduced salaries, layoffs, etc.? Great question. Is there any additional color you would add to that before we start answering it?
Yeah, so I think that this is a great time for us to take a look at our staff in general and our processes and do whatever it takes to improve the agency. With less work to do, there's time to do educational things or whatever, but it's also, good for the business, bad for, in general. It's also a time when there's a lot of great talent out there that's recently free, and it
Yes.
may be a good opportunity to pick up some great talent. But I'm worried about my team. So we all, when it
Yes.
first hit, we're in travel and tourism
Yep.
specialists. So we got very hard hit, especially at first. And, we did a salary cut across the board. Everybody, including leadership, took a salary cut. And now I'm looking at cutting back hours on some people and maybe even doing 1 or 2 layoffs of some people that, after assessing, they're not necessarily top performers. And so again, this is the time for us to pull our weight and be extra responsive with our clients. So how
Yes.
do I keep my staff that's going to stay on motivated and, and encouraged to keep giving their all during this tough time, as they see some team members maybe not be around anymore.
Right. Some who aren't there anymore, maybe it's not so sad. And then for others, it may be more sad, kind of depending on the relationship and their productivity.
Right.
Of course, I think we've all had employees where maybe everyone liked them except their boss, right? Like everyone around them loved working with them, but if you were responsible for performance, you weren't quite as much of a fan. So yeah, that's a challenge. Well, there are a few things going on here. First, you're not alone in making cuts in terms of considering layoffs, in terms of reducing compensation, in terms of considering furloughs. If we think about the hours reduction, in a sense, that's a partial furlough. And so you're not alone in that. So it's not fun, but it's happening. In terms of morale from employees who are staying, in general, when it comes to layoffs, my view is that if you need to do a layoff, make it as big as it needs to be and do it once. That is, don't do one round and then a smaller round and then a smaller round, because then everyone is ultimately wondering, are they next? Right? They're wondering, who's next and are they part of it? So the idea there is do that bigger layoff initially, or relatively bigger rather than multiple. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah.
And sometimes that gets into a situation. For instance, I was working with a client who has 15 employees, and she was weighing, do they lay off 3 people or do they lay off 2 people in addition to doing salary reductions? So higher percentages for the executive team, the owners and executives, and then somewhat lower percentages, compensation cut for everyone else. And if you do percentage cuts for team members, I believe you should cut the highest level people by a higher percentage than the more junior employees. Not only will that save more money, the optics just work a lot better, right? To be able to say, I'm sorry, we've cut your compensation 10%. We've cut ours 30%, or we've cut ours 20%, or whatever the case may be. Obviously, you're still making more money, but such as it is. So those are a couple of points to keep in mind. If there are layoffs, ideally do one and get it over with. Sometimes one of the challenges is, for instance, is it 3 people or 2 people? Is it 2 people or 1 person? Is it 5 or 4? You're sort of on that cusp. Do you have a sense of Or are there any particular things you're struggling with there?
So as far as layoffs, it's actually, I'm in a good position in the sense that I
Okay.
have a very small team. I have 6 full-timers.
Uh-huh.
Everyone else is a contractor. So the contractors are just not getting as much work because there isn't
Got it.
as much work to be had. As far as the full-timers, I have one that I am definitely laying off.
Okay.
And I have one that is going to go and become a contractor. She already has her own firm and
Okay.
has a couple of clients on the side anyway. So it would make an easy transition. And then
Got
that
it.
leaves me really with just the executive team, my most senior operations manager, and my senior developer.
Got it.
So, but I'm also, the flip side of that is I'm thinking of bringing in a new account manager who's more
Ah,
seasoned and a better player. And that's where I'm worried about, how do I introduce that? Like saying, oh, I've had to lay off these people because, oh, COVID, but how do you
yeah.
afford then the new one? So that's the sticky wicket.
Yes. Well, and that tends to be true when you have employees or contractors with performance problems in general. Where someone is like, when things are okay, maybe you keep them. Maybe they're not bad enough to fire. But then when the
Right.
economy shifts or other things change or you lose a big client, just in general, suddenly you start thinking more critically about that person. I had a client who was saying
Right.
about a year ago, before COVID, she wasn't thrilled that she had to make retirement contributions for a mediocre employee. I've got my model of new rope employees who are great and strong and drive your agency forward versus wet twine agency employees who, are making your life miserable. And the employee was, in my view, the employee was wet twine. She thought he was sort of in the middle. And so, the up team was like, I had to make this big retirement contribution for him. And I was thinking to myself, well, if you'd fired him 2 years ago, you wouldn't have been making any retirement contribution for him. So I would say for
Right.
everyone who's listening, if you've got a team member who is problematic, or maybe they're good at the work, but they're not a good culture fit, you want to weigh how much longer can you afford to keep them on the team, especially if they're a toxic employee. They're great at the work, but they're difficult to work with, or there are other culture issues. I'm not sure you can really afford to keep them. I once had a team member that we hired remotely, Sean. Sean was a senior web developer, or in theory, he was a senior web developer. Never met him in person. And initially, we had some challenges getting what we needed from him. I was PMing the project. And, Sean would always be making excuses about why he wasn't getting things done. There'd be this excuse, that excuse. And initially, it seemed like maybe there was just a personality conflict between us. One of Sean's running phrases was, I've explained that to you already, except that he said that to me and the
Ooh.
strategist and one of our other developers. And it's like,
Mm.
well, wait a minute. If he's explained it already and no one understood what he said, who's the common factor here, right? The signature moment with Sean was we were doing an internal conference call. Sean was on the speakerphone, thankfully not there in person. The rest of the team was in person. And I asked him to explain a recent architecture decision he had made, and he blew up. And he said, working with you, I think he meant all of us, not just me, but working with you is like trying to teach algebra to kindergartners. And he hung up on us.
Oh,
Unfortunately, it was another month before I could persuade the agency owner to let us fire him. Yeah. So if you've got a situation where there's someone who's mediocre and you're like, how do we get rid of them? If you're eliminating the position, if it's a restructuring, then that could be done as a layoff. Based on the shift in the economy, this is no longer a full-time position. Importantly, my HR, accounting and HR advisor has noted that if you do that, you really can't rehire that role for 6 months. that's probably the safest approach, but you don't want to say to someone, we're restructuring your role, we're eliminating the role, and then a week later, the replacement starts. That wouldn't be a good idea.
Yeah.
So if it's not a case that you're eliminating the role, then you need to fire them. That it's a firing rather than a layoff. With the senior AM, it sounds like this is a new role, though. Is that correct?
Yeah. So this is a junior person. It's the opposite. She has a wonderful personality. She's
Okay.
very friendly. People like her, but she just, she's just like, doesn't really get the strategy, doesn't really produce the results, is a terrible writer, a lot of little detail mistakes and whatnot. So it's the type of thing where she needs a lot of hand holding from her supervisor. And, the supervisor finally said, look, if we restructured so that instead of having an account manager and account coordinator, we just brought in another senior account manager instead, we would be a lot more effective. And so I'm letting go of the junior person and cutting back to part-time the middle person, and then bringing in someone more senior, part-time as well, to start with.
Got it. It sounds like in that case, because you're effectively eliminating the junior position, it's that based on our shift in business strategy, we need, we like you, but we need senior people. The only case that might become sticky is if she's like, well, I am senior, or like, I can do it. It's like, well, obviously she's not. So that might be a potential point of argument to deal with. But from what you've described, that sounds restructure-y. I would talk to someone who's an expert in HR law in Florida, just to confirm the specific. In terms of final point, and then RK will go over next to your question, and then Joe, you're up third on the hot seat as a heads up. You had mentioned about how to keep everyone else motivated. I think to an extent, people's motivation, some of it you have no control over. Every time a new unemployment filings announcement comes out, everyone's going to wonder about their jobs, right? They're going to be like, more people are unemployed, am I next? So, you can't address that. You also can't promise everyone their job forever. But that said, the more open and more transparent you can be, to the extent that you can be, the more people are going to feel comfortable with what's going on. And it's a case where you probably need to over communicate. Maybe if you were sending a monthly update, now it's time for weekly updates, that kind of thing. You probably don't need a status on the agency every day. That's going to be too much. But consider that anytime there's a major public news announcement, people are going to wonder. Thinking about unemployment news, thinking about individual states or countries or provinces reopening, people are wondering how that impacts them, that kind of thing. So basically, put yourself in the shoes of an employee where, their salary is their primary source of income for most employees. If you're in their shoes, what would you be thinking about? So does that help give some perspective on your questions there?
Yeah, this was super helpful. And I see that you put a guide on the chat. So thank you for that as well.
Absolutely. Yes. And if for people, so Omi, thank you for sharing. Appreciate it. I'm glad to hear it was helpful. For everyone, if you look on chat, I've shared a link to my layoff guide for agencies. This is a step-by-step guide on what to do if you need to do layoffs. It's not a fun topic. If you're a newsletter subscriber, I shared that a couple weeks ago. It's not a fun topic, but I think it's something that, the more strategic you can be, the easier it'll be if and when the time comes. And if you don't need to use it, even better. And if you do, you can be more strategic about it. So there we go. Well, RK, you are up next. If you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, and then Joe, you will be up after RK. All righty. RK,
Thank you
go
so
ahead.
much, Karl.
Absolutely. Good evening.
Great. So I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, I can.
I think there is. Okay. All right. We'll just go roll with it. Excellent. So I just wanted to give you a small, let's say a preface about this conversation. A few
Yes.
years ago, like 2015, I still remember that day. That day clearly. Uh, I just got married, and and my biggest client in Florida, got arrested, and we
They got
lost a
arrested.
major revenue channel. And sorry.
Your client got arrested, you said?
Yes, my
Oh,
agency client,
wow.
yeah, he was in a lot of things, and
Mm,
under influence, and beat domestic violence and things like that.
wow.
Uh, anyway, so yeah, so he got arrested, and we lost a major revenue source from there, and then instead of laying off all my people, right? So I did not want to lose all my best talents, which I groomed over a period of time,
Yeah.
and I did not know so what to do. So that is when I actually spoke to Karl on Clarity.fm, I believe,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
Yeah. So and Carl asked me a very profound question on that day. RKs, did you, over the years of running your agency, have you built any asset that you can sell right now to generate some cash flow?
Yes.
That really hit me, that day. He asked me, like, is there any asset that you have built over the period, that you can let go and make some quick cash inflow? I did not have any, like, that was when I really realized that I have nothing to be proud of, like apart from being able to travel to 30 countries, after starting my agency business,
Yeah.
apart from that, there was nothing else to say that I built something, valuable in terms of wealth.
Hmm.
No assets, to nothing whatsoever. That is when I started researching on how I can create a scalable agency that, even if I sell, I will be able to generate cash flow. And one of the easiest responses I got was about offering productized services in
Yes.
such a way that everything that runs in your agency is not dependent on me. Even if I remove myself from the equation, because I have a smooth running process and systems in place, clients who are paying a monthly fee, and services that can be literally transferred from one team to the other,
Hmm.
if that has to be the case, because we have the processes set for it. That is when my journey for that began. Uh, but I'm sorry I'm making this so long, but I really want to get you the context of where I'm going at.
Yes. Thank you.
So I tried a lot of things like productized services, offering, like small gigs and things like that, which I can, but none of them really was really profitable, because once we started doing it, that is when I realized the depth of it. And mostly that includes things like, Infusionsoft or HubSpot or, Active Campaign, because the client already came with uh, a history of using that tool, and they did not want to switch over to any other tool. So again, we had to go through the learning curve of learning a new tool every time a new client came in. That
Mhm.
is when I realized, okay, enough is enough. Right now, I have actually zeroed it down to just two productized services. One is, uh, I'm not sure if you have heard about the growth driven design methodology by HubSpot.
Yes. Yeah.
The
The
growth driven design is all
framework
about
you're.
creating a launchpad website,
Yep.
right, a minimum viable launchpad website, and charging a monthly fee to create this hypothesis and validate those hypotheses on a monthly service.
Yep.
So a website design will become a retainer, not a one-off project.
Exactly. And
So
it's
that
a
is one
great
thing
way
which
to.
I'm truly passionate about, and I really like it. Yes, I really like it because first of all, it has a monthly recurring revenue option of it. And the second thing, because the website has to evolve with the evolving needs of the clients and
Mhm.
evolving needs of the business owner as well,
Yes.
right? So that is something which I started doing, and I started charging $1,500 upfront
Hmm.
and $300 a month, $299 a month, like based upon the size of the, whether if it's a agency client or a direct client.
Got it.
So that is one thing I'm doing. And the other thing which I got really good response was repurposing, content repurposing. These days, we have a lot of people who are scheduling podcasts and videos. I reached out to 5 of them and offered a package wherein we take your existing content, we repurpose that into multiple formats, and give a second chance for the content to perform. And this time, we will be using measurable tactics. For example, adding UTM, tracking links to all your campaigns so that you know which content produced the maximum results. So kind of giving you these extra pair of measurement, monitoring systems in place, so you know that what kind of content is resonating with your audience. So I have not started scaling these yet because I'm still testing it out and creating systems behind the delivery and the fulfillment. So before I make a lot of mistakes, I just wanted to understand what are the mistakes that I can avoid doing while this journey of transitioning from a marketing agency to a productized service company, and what are the best practices in terms of pricing?
Absolutely. So basically, avoiding common mistakes, and also best practices on pricing. All right, cool. And for anyone who's listening and you've considered productized versus custom, I have shared a link in chat. I have an article that I wrote earlier this year about custom versus productized services, pros and cons. So I've shared that on chat. So if you want to take a look at it afterwards, you're welcome to. So in terms of common mistakes that I see people make, and thank you for sharing the background on things, RK. One of the big ones is getting clear, or the mistake is not getting clear on the idea of client versus customer. So if you're doing some sort of a SaaS subscription, you're paying $19 a month or $49 a month or what have you, you are a customer of that company, right? You're getting a product or you're getting some sort of an ongoing service. You don't really get to customize it. For instance, I use GetResponse for my email marketing. It is a lot more powerful than MailChimp was when I used MailChimp in the past. The user experience leaves a lot to be desired. And one of my team members and I joke that anytime like something's acting weirdly, the automatic response from their support team is, "That's a great idea. We've gotten suggestions about that idea. We'll put it in the list." It comes up a lot. But you know what? It's only $49 a month. For $49 a month, it's worth a bit of extra hassle dealing with it. And so that was an upgrade at the time. Now, the next step will be something more robust, than GetResponse. But it's kind of like, I'm not expecting them to customize the software for me for $49 a month. So I'm a customer. On the other hand, when it comes to work, so like working with a copywriter to write case studies, interview several of my clients to write case studies about their experience working with me, and that'll go into a new version of my website. That is a fully custom service, right? She's interviewing people, she's writing the draft, I can request tweaks and this and that, but I'm paying her per hour for it. And so that's the case where I'm a client. Now, the challenge becomes when you're offering productized services as an agency, people aren't exactly, they're not fully custom clients, but they're also not exactly customers, right? They're somewhere in between. And you have to decide what is the level of service you're going to provide for someone who is a productized service client. It's probably more than $49 a month, but it's less than a client that's paying thousands of dollars a month. And so you have to find the right approach. So for instance, when it comes to inquiries for help, if it's custom, someone could potentially call an account manager. They've got a dedicated account manager. The account manager knows them. They're like, "Oh yeah, how's your family doing? This and that." And then they can take care of things. Whereas, if I have a problem with a, software service, I'm writing into support, or I might be calling, or, something like that. I'm not expecting that the person I talk to knows anything about my account, but that's okay. So you need to decide what's the right balance. And I've shared a link in chat to my article about how I create a boutique client experience. That's what I do for executive coaching clients, agency roadmap, and custom consulting clients. You know, the goal is this really nice experience. On the other hand, if someone, say, buys my agency profitability toolkit, it's a software, it's an information product, you're not getting a logo painting, like a painting of your logo that you would as an executive coaching client or, or higher end services client. It's not that it's like uncaring, but it's not as attentive. It's not as in depth. So I think the thing for you to decide, RK, is how much attention do people get? If they want to reach out for help, how accessible should people on your team be? Do they need to go through a ticketing system, or do they talk to a person? Or maybe is there a higher tier where they talk to a person? Definitely they can't be talking to you. Your time is too valuable. You can't be accessible to them. Maybe you might be involved in the sales process to an extent, but then you're handing them off to the team. So that's the key thing. Like, what's the level of service? The second point would be around the level of customization. For instance, say if you're using Basecamp, the project management software or sort of client communication software, you can do all kinds of customization within the system, but you can't demand that the system work a different way, kind of thing. The challenge is your team could, in theory, customize how the process works. You have to decide, do you want to? If the goal is to be more productized, I probably would lean toward no, don't customize that. Or if it is, it needs to be a kind of an explicit conversation, and you have to decide, is it worth it? I did a workshop in March about project management fundamentals, and we talked a bit about scope creep there, and how do you deal with scope creep? And I'm actually going to share a link to the recording on that. I'm actually going to do a more in-depth look exclusively at scope creep coming up in June for Filament, the agency training company. And in that case, it's like, how do you deal with that? One of the things that I'll share is my 7 magic words to stop scope creep. It's part of the promo, but if you're listening today, you will hear what those 7 magic words are. And those 7 magic words are, would you like an estimate for that? They're like, oh, we'd love this, blah, blah, blah. Would you like an estimate for that? I just shared a link to that in chat. Half the time people are like, oh, that's extra, never mind. Maybe 40% of the time they're like, oh, yeah, like, let me know what the quote is, and then I'll decide if I want to do it or not. And then maybe 10% of the time clients are like, extra, that's extra. Why should I have to pay extra for that? I thought that was included. If that's the case, then probably you should come to my client onboarding workshop coming up later this month, where we talk about how to head off some of those problems before they become problems, so that they know what was included and what wasn't. But those are the 2 biggest things. Find the level of service you want to provide so you don't over-service them, and then making sure you're able to control the scope to keep it from exploding. So any concluding or follow-up questions on that before we shift over to Joe?
Absolutely. So obviously we cannot offer a value-based pricing here.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be like one price that everybody sees it, and that is going to be public on the website as well. There is no quote, there is no proposal, there is no contracts. So in that case, how should I price it? Like, for example, the website design service, which I told you about, it's $300 a month. Yes. And the website is like $1,500, or if they pay for the entire year upfront, we can actually give a very steep discount, because that is one thing. But for the repurposing services, we are actually pricing it at like $400, $497, $797, and $997 per month.
Got it.
Which includes like 4 sets of repurposing, 8 sets, and 12 sets, per month.
Yeah.
So in that case, like, is is it a good pricing model to follow? Because we are also giving them the client portal, which is, there is no project management tool, there is no customizations allowed. What you see is what you get, kind of
Yeah.
a thing. So in that case, like any advice on the pricing, how we can, make sure.
So the prices sound reasonable. Obviously, not everyone's going to want to pay everything for everything. Some people can find a way to complain about everything. Whenever agencies, when I talk to clients and I'm like, you should charge more from what they describe, they're like, well, my clients can't pay that much money. It's like, all right, well, maybe your current clients can. How do you get in front of people who can gladly pay that much money? And sometimes it's like, well, I don't know where they are. I don't know where they have the money. I shared an article. This is Get Bigger Clients. The analogy there is if you're fishing in the river, are you fishing for them in the wrong spot? Like if you moved up or down the river, you'd find the clients with more money, or are you in the wrong river altogether? Like maybe you're focused on an industry and no one has money. Or I talked to an agency owner in the state of Louisiana. She lived near New Orleans, and she asked if I could give her a Louisiana discount. I'm like, what's a Louisiana discount? She said, well, it's just really hard to do business here in the state of Louisiana. So like, can you give me a discount just for living here? I said that wasn't really an option, but I, was sorry that she was struggling to be there. This was months before the pandemic. This had nothing to do with the pandemic. So basically, figuring out who has the money. I don't know if I'd say that value-based pricing isn't applicable at all. Certainly if you're value anchoring about what's the potential impact of the work, you could potentially charge more. I will say that most people are going to assume tiered pricing like that. So I think a lot of it is just getting in front of people who, who see that as a great deal. If they're paying, for instance, $9.97, but they think that it's worth $3,000 a month, they're going to be happy, or hopefully they'll be happy. So a lot of it is figuring out how to anchor the value about, what would it look like, for instance, if they had to hire people internally. I just shared a link to my article on value anchoring in chat. If they had to do it internally, what would that cost? Or if they had to go through the hassle of justifying hiring a new person, what would that be like? Whereas, nope, just pay you $4.97 and they're fine. So a lot of it is getting in front of the right people and then anchoring off the value they're getting. But from what you've shared, that sounds like a good plan. But check out the value anchoring article for a bit more on that. And one other thing before we shift over to Joe, I went to a pricing workshop by Tim Williams of Ignition Consulting Group. He's a fellow agency consultant. His focus is pricing models and agency business models. And he did a half-day workshop on transform your revenue model. So I had signed up for his $395. And it was pretty good. Got some useful stuff from that. Two people who have really good pricing stuff. I mean, my pricing stuff is good, but if you're looking more broadly, I would also look at Blair Enns with his book, Pricing Creativity. I'll put a link to that as well.
Win without pitching.
Yes. So Blair's got great stuff. I was a reviewer for Pricing Creativity. And my review for the book was something like, this will be the most expensive book you ever buy. And if you dare to follow the advice, it will make you 6 to 7 figures.
It's funny you mentioned it. I just bought it day before yesterday.
Oh, all right. Well, there we go. And as I share, I don't receive any referral fees. So if I recommend something, it's because it's good. Well, okay. Thank you. Good luck. We're going to switch over to Joe now. And then if we have any time at the end, we've got about 15 to 17 minutes. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to share. I'm also going to share one more poll as we head into the home stretch and Joe, answer your questions. This is around recovery timeline. When do you think things will turn around for your agency? Options are it's already turned around or it never was bad. 0 to 3 months from now, 4 to 6 months from now, 7 to 9 months from now, 10 to 12 months from now, or more than 12 months from now. So if you want to vote in the poll, please go ahead, and I'll share the results after we answer Joe's question. Joe, you go ahead. You can unmute yourself. Look forward to helping.
Great. Thanks for taking the time. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. And to recap, you had said, is it advisable to move common universal components that you might normally reserve for the sales proposal to move those to the website? So I'd love to hear.
Yeah, and
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I can add a little bit more context since I was a little limited in that form.
Yeah.
Essentially right now, I've read a little bit of your stuff about, only going into the proposal phase when you're sure they're qualified to buy, they have the budget, and, you've already had a few discussions.
Yeah.
So I've been taking that approach overall. Within the proposal itself, in order to not take, 4 to 6 hours to create every proposal, I've created a template that's like around 30 to 40 pages, which is probably still too long. But when I'm offering, a bunch of services and I'm doing some, like a quick audit of their site, and I want to show some value up front by pointing out opportunities for them, that's kind of like how long it takes to give them the correct context for the proposal. My question is, so probably about half of the proposal includes slides where I'm more talking about my services in a universal way, where in general the service applies to multiple clients, so I can reuse that across proposals.
Right.
And so let's say that's 50% of each proposal. I was wondering should I take that 50% that I include in every proposal and just put it on the sales landing page of my site or the service page of my site. Therefore, they have a lot more information up front before they fill out the quote form, and I can then shorten up the custom proposal? Or is it better to include those in the proposal itself so that the client feels like they're getting more attention and more of a custom proposal? So I'm trying to strike that balance and curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, well, there are a few things going on here. One, what to put in the proposal. 2, what to put ahead of time as part of the sort of pre-sales process. But I think the third thing is what is ultimately going to make the proposal as successful as possible. And, so consider, ideally, you're only doing a sales proposal for a prospect who is well qualified and ready to buy. I'm pretty picky. I generally won't create a proposal unless they've either narrowed it down to just me or maybe one other person. Because, as I think about among agency consultants, everyone has different strengths and weaknesses. You should really be able to figure out who's the right person, separate from what the proposal is. It's who seems to be the right person? Maybe you narrow it down to 2, but if someone's this hasn't specifically come up, but they're I'm thinking of 5 different people. I'm oh, who are the 5 people? One time I asked, the person was well, I don't think it's in my interest to tell you that. And I'm all right, well, it feels like this conversation is about over. I'm going to keep talking a little bit, but I don't like where this is going. And now, obviously, agencies don't always have that option, right? People may be considering a lot of options. I would say, just in general, on whether to create a proposal or not, a question. This is for everyone listening. Strongly recommend. There's that idea of asking a client, what's your budget? I don't really love that question because people assume that whatever budget you recommend will be whatever number they just shared, right? They've got $50,000. You're all right, the price is $49,000, kind of thing. People sort of assume, right? But I'd rather navigate it like this. And Joe, this is important because this may help you head off having to do some of the proposals in the first place. Yeah. So, you could say to people, rather than asking, do you have a budget? Because people are sort of on edge on that. You could ask, have you created a budget yet for this work? Now, I don't ask that question because people usually don't have a budget for agency consulting or executive coaching. Sometimes they do. But when it comes to, say, building a website or doing an ongoing marketing program or doing creative work, they should have a budget. This isn't like something that they've realized, oh, I should do this. I have no idea what it'll cost, kind of thing. So ask people, have you created a budget yet for this? Then I like volunteering a range. So for instance, I have a client in Colorado who specializes in custom web and app development. And, the way that I talked through with him, and his clients tend to be mid to enterprise size businesses and local government. So like there is a budget. Someone has created a budget. But if he asks, have you created a budget yet? And they haven't yet, they're like fishing, right? They're kind of early in the stage. My suggestion to him is to say something like, okay, well, we're glad to help. Typically, when we do this type of work, the budget ranges from $50,000 to $250,000. And the prospective client's like, whoa, it's a huge range. And he's like, well, there's a lot of variation in the work, but is your budget somewhere in that range? The power of that question is if it's less, they're usually going to volunteer their budget. Usually they're going to say, oh, well, we were thinking it would be more like 30,000. Okay. If it's roughly in the range, they might say, yes, it's in the range, more toward the lower end, more like 50 to 75. Then he can say, or his salesperson can say, oh, great, well, we have solutions that could fit there. It may not be everything, but we can get something done within that range. Or if they were like, oh, yeah, that's about what I expected. When I do that, people will be like, yeah, that's about what I expected. People usually aren't surprised. So that's a key question to ask up front. Do you have a budget yet? If they don't have a budget yet, give the range. If they don't have a budget yet, do not create a proposal. Never create a proposal if they don't have a budget yet. Joe, have you run into cases where you created the proposal and then suddenly they're like, well, actually, we don't have the money?
In the distant past, I have a few years ago, but I've kind of learned to, qualify them at least to some degree. On the most recent proposal, I asked them if they had any specific budget range in mind, and they said, no, we don't. But the reason that I felt they were qualified and worth moving on with the proposal, which is still in progress right now, is because I did mention the typical ranges for some of the projects that I can do for them, and they didn't balk at the prices at all, and they were like interested still, and so I felt they were qualified to move on for that situation.
I think that's a reasonable assumption. If you've reviewed it and they don't say anything, you can decide how firm you want to be. The related point, so like for instance, thinking about RK's question earlier about productized versus custom, all of my executive coaching is productized. Like it's custom within the call, but there's a monthly 2-hour call, there's between call email support, there's certain accountability things, that kind of thing. So like, I don't know what we'll talk about in month 7 when we start, but I know there will be a month 7 call and there are certain parameters that it fits into. Kind of. So like, I don't do proposals for those. What is a typical thing that you would be proposing, Joe, just to get a sense of that?
Yeah, content marketing and link building, to support a website's SEO.
Got it.
And so, yeah, that's, it's in the upper, it's probably like in the range of like 5 to 10,000 a month in general.
Got it.
And I guess the point is, for some people that's just totally out of range, but for some people they can definitely afford it and they want it. And I think it's more about I use the proposal to essentially like build the case of the ROI on it and how it can support the overall efforts. I think because it's more of a niche offering, because everyone knows they want more traffic, everyone knows they want links, but the method of doing it is a little more niche and takes more explanation. So I think I can for sure explain it better on the website. Right now it's mainly in the proposal. And so yeah, striking that balance is key. But I think your suggestions are definitely spot on for, in the initial intro call, feel them out and suggest that range.
Right.
Within the, oh, go ahead.
Getting specifically to like how much to include in the proposal versus otherwise. I think that's going to depend on your individual client base. So for instance, when there are more stakeholders, when there's a committee involved, you probably want more in the proposal, because in that case, you should assume that the only thing you can assume that people might look at, and they still might not even, is the PDF you send them, right, or however you deliver it. Whereas if you're working, say, with an individual business owner, or the CEO of a mid-sized company, to an extent, there are fewer people involved. So like I only work with agency owners. Most are, or say it's a mix between solo or 2 or 3 business partners. If it's multiple business partners, everyone needs to be on the call. It's like timeshare sales. No, like I'm going to go talk to my spouse about that.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. But when it's one person, I'm fairly confident that they've read what I've shared, and I don't have to like get everyone enlisted on things. On the other hand, in the past, when I've worked with enterprise clients at agencies, there's the marketing director, there's the like marketing manager, the IT director has randomly inserted themselves in the decision, which is like, where do they come from? There might be a CEO. If it's a nonprofit, there's the executive director, and maybe the board members want to be involved. So I'd say the more complex the sales process, the more you want to get into the proposal. That would be a key thing to keep in mind.
Right.
That said, there's also a question of when to do the proposal. So if you do an initial exploratory call, sort of a bit from my approach. If people reach out, usually I'll get a contact form submission or an email saying, I'm struggling with this, can you help? Usually it's a match because I'm pretty clear about what I can do to help. And then we'll share, that sounds like a fit. Please click here to schedule an exploratory call, and by a day or 2 before the call, fill out the pre-survey. 7 questions, 10 to 15 minutes. I know before the call, I have a call later this afternoon, based on the responses, I'm 80% sure that this is a good fit. I have some questions about the baseline assumptions, right? The owner's goal is to increase revenue and profits. I can do that. The question is how much? Like the agency owner in Canada about a year ago who said he wanted to 5x his revenue in 1 year. From $1 million, right? It already, it's not like he was going from nothing to 5x. And I was like, that's not likely. What if you did 2 or 3x? He's like, 3x might work, 2x might be boring. Wait, so you wait a minute. And then I ultimately declined to work with him because initially he was like, I want employee retention to be really strong and grow 5x. So I'm going to take care of the team. And I'm like, those don't really go together, or at least not, in terms of those numbers. And he's like, well, what if employee retention morale is only good enough to get us to 5x? And I'm like, all right, I'm not going to work with you. You're planning to exploit your team. I don't want to be part of that. So, we'll do the exploratory call. If it's for coaching, usually that's enough from there. People can decide yes or no. If it's a custom project, then I need to do some regrouping with my team to figure out, based on what I know about budget, based on what I know about how to get there, what makes sense. And then there'll be a follow-up where I present the proposal, or I'll usually schedule the proposal review, send it the day before so people can look at it, and then we walk through it. It's not like here's the surprise reveal kind of thing.
Right.
But if it were a much more complex engagement, or for instance, there's like a surprise extra stakeholder. I did a call with an agency owner in California where it seemed like she was the sole owner. Nope, she had an outside investor who turned out to be her stepfather, or sort of like he was like her mom's high school sweetheart, and then he like reappeared 30 years later, and saved the day and this and that. Well, it turned out this guy is now a majority owner in the agency because he bought out her ex-husband, the owner's husband, not. And we were going to have a call, and I had some concerns about the guy. And then she like was like whispering, and I'm like, what's going on? And she's like, his office is down the hall.
Wow.
No, it was a mess.
That's the relationship you want. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was a case where I ended up having a call with him. That was no fun. My eventual follow-up to her was, I'm glad to work with you, but I will not work with him. And she was like, well, I think he wants to be involved. Let me talk to him. And he declined being excluded, and so I didn't work with her. That was a case where having a few additional conversations saved me a huge amount of time. So the thing for you to consider, and for everyone listening, sometimes adding an extra phone call might seem like it slows it down initially, but it might save you from all kinds of problems. So does that help?
And related to, yeah, it helps a lot. Related to that, would you ever have a cap on phone calls? Obviously you would, but if it's like a $1 million opportunity, then you'd be happy to do 20 calls. But if it's 100,000, then you would do 5 maybe or less.
I mean,
do you have any like framework on that? Is it just strictly complexity and budget? Yeah.
I think that's a good proxy, right? Using the potential budget size. That said, of course, just because they're a large organization doesn't mean they are willing to spend all the budget. I did work, I was a director of client services, where one of our clients was a pharmaceutical development company. So they were like a for-hire contract, or they were a contract research firm. And one of the marketing VPs was like, she was complaining about everything. We like quoted a mini site for like $17,000. She was like, I want to pay $11,000. I'm like, really? And ultimately we sold it for $17,000. But I noticed when I became the director of operations, I was also processing the checks that came in. The checks from their company, where they would complain about, spending a few thousand a month on a retainer and this and that. They had a note, 2 signatures required for amounts over X. The amount that required 2 signatures was $50,000. They could have prepaid their whole retainer and not needed a second signature. And yet there she was complaining. So
yeah,
weigh the potential impact, but do consider. I had some interactions recently where initially it seemed like it was going to be anywhere from $25,000 to $95,000 for a project, and then it was like, well, that's a bit much. And then it was like, well, what if we could do like this part, and then this part, and then now they've disappeared. So you never know. I would say that there need to be.
It's nuanced. It's not a clear framework.
Exactly. I would say that the more people, final 2 things. One, the more stakeholders there are, the more likely you are to have swoop and poop. So, that's where the executive suddenly shows up the last minute, deposits some fun feedback, and then flies away, leaving you to clean up the mess. The more likelihood of swoop, the more important it is to have more calls and have, more questions up front. Doing a pre-kickoff survey, and I'll share my link to that. When you do a pre-kickoff survey, you are more likely to find those situations, especially if they're like, oh, the CEO doesn't care about this. He or she is too busy. They're not going to fill out the pre-kickoff, which takes 10 to 15 minutes, but don't worry about it. I guarantee there will be swoop and poop from them later. The final point about like how much to consider or not, I'm going to share the survey results and then go from there. What is going to persuade them to take action? If seeing the extra stuff makes them feel like you've given them extra attention, then include it. On the other hand, if it confuses them and it's more to wade through, then you probably need to remove it. I think in that case, the big driver is what is their level of digital marketing sophistication. If they're more sophisticated, more might be okay. If they're less sophisticated, you probably want to pull more out. Does that help?
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
All right.
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thanks for all those ideas. And
absolutely. Well, Joe, thank you for sharing. I have the results of the poll as we wrap up. So we asked, when do you think things will turn around for your agency? Let's see. Let me share the results. 3 people said it's already turned around for us or never was bad. 3 more said 0 to 3 months from now, and 3 further said 4 to 6 months from now. I sure hope so. Obviously, we don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I will say that I have come up with a framework to help you predict when things are likely to turn around. I believe most people listening are subscribers to my newsletter. If you're not, I just shared a link to that. Check it out. I have an article coming out tomorrow where I share my recovery timeline framework. The idea there is that, it's like, how fast will our agency turn around? Ultimately, that depends on when your clients feel more confident. And that ultimately depends on when their customers start spending. And so, the idea there is when your clients' customers start spending, your clients will be spending more, and then you'll get more money. Some of it will happen somewhat sooner, right? If you've got a client who's struggling to get customers, they're probably going to spend for marketing help sooner to make that happen. But if we look, directionally. And so in the article, I will share a framework for thinking about it. There are 4 possibilities. You've got demand destroyed. That's due to the pandemic, demand just disappeared, especially true in travel. You've got demand deferred, where demand will eventually happen, but they're putting it off. An example might be, they need a washing machine. They're probably eventually going to buy a new washing machine, just maybe not this month, but eventually they will. Demand unchanged, things are about the same as before, and demand created, in that case, things, you've got new demand. So taking a look at your client base and looking at their customers, which of those 4 is it primarily? That'll give you an idea of your relative turnaround time. If it's mostly demand destroyed, it's going to take a long time. If it's demand created, you're probably not even noticing the downturn apart from the self-isolation. So that'll be going out in the newsletter tomorrow. I look forward to hearing your feedback on it. And I would also love your feedback on how today went. Anything that you'd recommend to improve things. Feel free to share via email or via chat. I always like doing a debrief, what worked, what didn't, what to do differently next time. If you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. Anything you'd like to see next time. And you are welcome to pre-register for our next event. If you're an existing client, you have access to my first Tuesday of the month get together, the clients only one. And then everyone is open to join the public one like this, which is the second Tuesday of every month, 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, New York time. I just shared a link there. If you want to RSVP, it's June 9th, July 14th, August 11th, and so on. You can register for any or all free of charge, and tell your friends. Don't tell your enemies, but feel free to share with fellow agency leaders you like and want to help out. So again, Karl Sakas here. Thanks so much for joining. I will stay on a little bit if you want to share any further feedback in chat. Thank you so much, and hope to see you again soon. Take care.